Welcome to the Patrick Poirier Solving the Impossible Award. We are pleased to have you here. My name is Angeline.
And my name is Queenie.
And we are your hosts for today. Today's award will be given to young individuals aged 14 to 18 years old who are smart, innovative, and have the potential to solve complex problems in the world today.
We embark on these journeys to find these brilliant young minds and to support them in their lifetime endeavors. The award hopes to free them from financial constraints. Today's winner will win a prize fund of $1 million along with contributions to support them for a lifetime.
Today we have with us 5 finalists who will showcase their ideas through presentations. They will be judged by their perseverance, their creativity, and their problem-solving skills. We are not only looking for people with good ideas, but we are looking for people with the tenacity to strive forward and not give up on their process on scientific discovery.
Before we proceed, let us introduce the founder of Legacy Award, Patrick Poirier, to give us his speech.
Hello, I'm Patrick Poirier. I'm a general partner at Dragon's Vault. We're an investment fund that use cryptocurrency as leverage to invest in businesses. Let's say we have a $25 million right now of asset under management and growing. We've grown 240% in the last year. I started my career when maybe I was 12. I started programming a game back then. I became an entrepreneur early in my life. I've had about 6 businesses so far. So it's more recently that I became more like a venture capitalist. So let's face it, there's a lot of problems in the world. It's not just COVID-19, the pandemic, that is a problem. There's the climate change, there's starvation everywhere, there's poverty, there's a lack of clean water. And in my opinion, a lot of it can be traced to like an unsustainable population growth. I could be entirely wrong, but if it turned out that this is the real or part of the cause for all these problems, that just means that it's gonna keep getting worse and worse over the years. There will be much more new problems that are unsolvable that they are coming. So we need to find a better way to solve all those problems. So this is why I think it's really important that a lot of our scientists stop thinking about financial greed, because a lot of the new generation right now, they've been trained to think about just how to get money, and they are busy solving not any problem. They are building apps to take better picture of food, things of that nature. If it continues like this, the society will regress. So this is why the award is important to me. I want to make sure that we start thinking about things that matter more to human life. Now, given that this award is for a lifetime commitment, there's 2 very important criteria. As Queenie and Angeline said earlier, we need to make sure that the person receiving the award will be highly perseverant, and they will not give up because of failure or because of difficulties. So we need someone with high grit. So that's the most important part. The other thing is that even if someone is super interested in solving climate change, like solving one problem alone is not gonna do any good. Like it's gonna do some good, but it's not enough. Some technology that have been built over the years, for example, computers, this has helped thousands and thousands of scientists all over the world solving problems better and more efficiently and faster. We need such technology. To me, any kind of technology that can boost human intelligence or artificial intelligence have a chance to help thousands of other scientists to solve more complex problems that we ever seen in the past. And this is the kind of thing that we need. We need to think of appropriate toolings to help all those scientists all over the world. And the other thing is that providing $1 million to such a young scientist is something that I hope will motivate new generation that are coming into the workforce. So there's two kinds of technology that I believe have a chance to help thousands of people to solve problems. And one of them is artificial superintelligence. Essentially, it's just a computer system that think and problem solve like a human being, or better. Essentially, if it thinks like a human, then it can rebuild itself to actually eventually bypass our human intelligence, because we're constrained biologically. The computer system doesn't have to be. So it could actually become smarter than we are. And this is the type of technology we need. The other type of technology would be more like about gene editing, so that we can actually work on our own biology to bypass our limitation. For example, if we can have stronger working memory, that's one thing that can really help us think more creatively and kind of be able to solve problems that are a lot more complex. Where we're limited with our working memory, that's one of our main limitations. And otherwise, there's hybrids of the two. For example, Elon Musk is working on Neuralink. It's a way to interface those artificial superintelligence with biological, with our human brain, essentially. So any of those type of technology, and some that I cannot even think of, is what we need. And this is what I would like to support in the award, essentially. There's more to life than just financial greed and hoarding. Nobody really needs a Lamborghini, and even if you get one, you'll be happy for a few seconds to a few minutes, maybe a month at most. But eventually, there's things that are a lot more fulfilling, and to me, that's why I became a bit wealthy over the years, and I'd like to do more than just buying things. I want to support like the new generation and in doing things of like that. To me, it's a lot more fulfilling for myself, but I would like to find someone else like this in this recipient of the award, someone that will not be thinking about financial greed. I live in a tiny room. I don't even have a kitchen. I don't have a car. I don't need on any of those things. I prefer to use my wealth to do things that have an impact. And I'm hoping that the recipient of the award will be thinking like this also. So without further ado, let's go and listen to the finalists, what they are working on. And I'm quite impressed with what they have accomplished already. Despite their young age, a lot of them have accomplished more than the vast majority of human beings in the world. It's really impressive what they've done. And I cannot wait to see what they'll accomplish with $1 million backing them up.
Thank you, Patrick, for your inspiring speech. Now let us introduce our judges.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amir Bani Fatimi. I'm very pleased to be with you. I met Patrick a few years ago when we launched a very global challenge by X Prize called the AI X Prize. And at that time, that was my time to think about how AI is going to be a big impact in the world. We saw about 700 teams joining at that time. And it took a 5 years competition, so much that the 150 teams that came at the end, and Patrick was one of the teams at that time with a few other people in his own team, to try to solve very massive problems. We didn't ask people what to solve for. We just asked them, what do you think AI can be used for, and what we do with that? And a number of teams solved a problem around sustainable development goals, talking about poverty, water access, talking about gender equality, improving economic prosperity, talking about access to healthcare, saving the oceans. And that was inspiring because we realized that many people in different countries are really thinking about meaningful problems, whether there is a business plan behind it or not. And it's important businesses thrive, but businesses that thrive while making an impact in the world are probably hitting two birds with one stone. And that's what you want to think about, is making an impact, solving big problems, and creating jobs, creating value in a way that on your way to success, not only you make a difference, but also you help others understand that you bring people with you. I believe this competition that you're part of has a meaningful impact. And as Patrick said, having a lifelong commitment is important. Entrepreneurship and problem solving is not a matter of just one day or 1 hour. It's a matter of a lifelong commitment. And sometimes we get probably busy with other things, we come back to it. But if you can think about as yourself as a long life commitment to problem solving, it's a better framing than just being an entrepreneur. And your outlook in life will change, how you look at problems will change, and your curiosity will be your best tool. So use your curiosity as your secret weapon. And I'm already excited by this competition and looking forward to your presentations. And welcome again.
Hi, I'm David Kang, a former naval officer and currently the Vice Chancellor for Infrastructure and Sustainability at the University of Colorado Boulder. Before coming here, I was at the White House and Pentagon working on energy, sustainability, critical infrastructure, resilience, and national security issues. One of the reasons I came into higher education was so that I'd have an opportunity to work with brilliant students like yourselves who want to make a positive impact on humanity in solving wicked problems. I'd like to offer my personal congratulations to all our young scientists here today. You really do inspire me, and I hope that you will continue your work and dream of making the world a better place. I'm confident that citizens like you are what will make a difference with health and wellness, climate change, social and economic justice, and equity across the world. With that, thank you for all you do, and I look forward to seeing your presentations.
Thank you, judges, for your introduction. We hope you'll enjoy what the participants will bring to you today.
So like we mentioned before, the participants will be showcasing their ideas by addressing how they will solve complex problems in the world and what they'll be doing to allow that to happen.
Just hearing about that, I can't wait to see what they're going to present to us.
Yes, exactly. Many of them come from the likes of IT, engineering, and more, and they are all between the ages of 14 to 18 years old.
They are young and smart, and most importantly, they have a heart for humanity. So it's amazing to see what they're going to do.
Yeah. So, as the saying goes, the youth is the hope of our future. And so I'm excited to see what the future can hold for us already. So, shall we introduce and see who they are?
Yes. Okay, so let's welcome our first participant for today. His name is Aahaan Maini. He's a 15-year-old machine learning engineer who has sights on accelerating the development of artificial general intelligence. After diving into the field of nanotechnology, his transition to ML prompted him to ask how we could improve the current AI, sparking his focus on building the tool that will enable the next generation of problem solving. So let's see how he can indeed solve problems for the next generation in his knowledge in technology. So Aahaan, please.
Awesome, yeah. One thing you forgot to mention is that I am super excited to be here. Huge thanks for everyone who organized this. And let's get started. Double check. Slides are working all good? All right, awesome. Artificial intelligence is overrated. Let me ask you one question to prove my point. Where is the intelligence? Before we go on to answer this question, let's back up to about 6 months ago when I received this message saying that the CEO of Quantify, one of the leading applied AI companies in Toronto, had read one of my nanotechnology articles and offered me an internship. Fast forward, and after completing the interview process, I started my full-time machine learning engineer internship the first week of August. So while I was working in the machine learning industry, one thing came to the shocking conclusion that artificial intelligence is actually not intelligent because it fundamentally does not understand the data. Instead, it's just focusing on curve fitting, whether it be 2 variable, 3 variable, or X variable. Almost all ML models today are focused on how we can optimize the weights and biases to match the curve of the input data. This is such a massive problem because we're limiting the possibility, endless capabilities of AI to this very simple, domain-specific, narrow curve-fitting stage. We're eliminating the chance to ever have logical reasoning or critical thinking, any of these important problem-solving traits in our AI. So ever since that day, I've always had this question in the back of my mind, is how can we improve AI? There must be a way we can improve the technology to solve this problem. And that's what brought me to the field of artificial general intelligence. Essentially, AGI is when we can get an AI model to demonstrate a human level of intelligence. Human intelligence is a pretty broad field, but can be characterized as these three major pillars. A, the model has to be able to solve different tasks and achieve different goals in unique environments. B, the model has to be able to handle unforeseen problems. And C, the model has to be able to develop generalizable knowledge and skills that are applicable across different domains. So as soon as I heard about the field of AGI, I shifted my entire goal from nanotech to AI to looking at how can I accelerate the development of AGI. Now, let's look a little bit more about the comparison between AI and AGI. The perfect analogy to explain the capabilities of current AI is like a screwdriver. It's a very useful tool, but it can only perform one function. It performs that one function very well, but it's limited. AGI would be more like a toolbox, starting with the ability to understand which tool is required for your purpose, and then providing and applying it to solve the problem. This is why I believe AGI is the key to our future. Because AGI will not only enable me and millions of other people like me to solve problems that are so complex, they're unfathomable by today's AI. The beauty of AGI lies in the fact that I'm trying to build a tool that can replicate human intelligence, and we can apply it to as many different problems as we like. A great example, climate change. Let's take an example case study of how AGI would solve climate change. The system inefficiencies that contribute to climate change would be solved by the raw computational power of AGI. But the main focus of the model would be for developing the optimal approach while considering all the different factors, things like the social, different perspectives, the stakeholders, as you can slide, the legal barriers, indigenous rights, all these different problems will be able to come with the ultimate approach. The model will be able to run simulations and predictions of altering all the variables to find which variables are the main needle movers and then tackle those. Now, I know AGI is a really long-term goal. And that's why the plan I have outlined here is my plan for getting myself to a level where I can start to build and iterate on a specific framework to achieve AGI. The first phase of my plan is focused on gaining the technical depth and understanding of the field of AGI. The second would be to pick a specific framework to double down on. And then finally would be to working with or working at top companies in the selected framework to tackle the needle movers in achieving AGI. Now, I mentioned frameworks a couple times, and there's broadly four main categories of frameworks known as approaches to achieving AGI. The first one is a symbolic approach. The symbolic approach was developed on the theory that knowledge is represented in our human brains through symbols. This is why if you look at the diagram here, it's very easy for our human minds to understand this. This apple, the structure, it's very intuitive for us. And a symbolic representation is actually encoded in the algorithm as well. A great example of a specific model in the symbolic approach is ACTAR. ACTAR is a programming language that was designed with principles of human cognition ingrained in it. Another approach is the emergentist approach, and this is developed on the theory that intelligence emerges from sub-symbolic levels, which creates unexplainable data and actually really strongly represents current neural networks. For example, we do not understand what these values mean as a human mind, but this is how an output would be represented in today's neural network. In fact, the entire approach is based on looking at current day neural networks and iterating them, accelerating them to a level where they can achieve AGI. Another sub-example of the emergentist approach that holds a lot of promise is hierarchical temporal memory. So HTM is an unsupervised learning model that's on a really great path to achieving a machine intelligence because of its ability to store, learn, and generalize between patterns in sequence data. HTM is built upon the thousand brains theory of intelligence, which it differs from the traditional theory in machine learning. Thousand brains theory states that every single column in a neural network actually has a fully built representation of the final output. Now, circling back to what I mentioned before about how we're looking at iterating on current neural networks, an HTM can be thought of as the next iteration of an LSTM, which is a type of recurrent neural network, mainly because they both have the signature loop, which allows them to process sequence data come up with one conclusive output. Now, with $1 million question. The main reason that HTM is on a path to AGI and it's differentiated in all these other models, so instead of using backpropagation and traditional gradient descent in its learning, HTM actually uses something known as the Hebbian learning rule. And the Hebbian learning rule was a rule that was developed based on the principles of neuroplasticity. And it states that the connection between any two neurons is strengthened if they're both either simultaneously on or simultaneously off. The next approach is exactly what it sounds like. The hybrid approach is combining both the symbolic and emergentist approaches to achieve cognitive synergy. So OpenCog, which is the pioneering organization in this field, has developed a real-time hypergraph representation of both the symbolic and sub-symbolic knowledge in something known as the atom space. A couple of different models and architectures that are working together in the atom space are visible in the diagram on the left. And within the atom space as well, it's hard-encoded a specific cognitive architecture in which it divides the word intelligence into separate sub-cognitive units, with each one of them being represented for each one of them responsible for one type of information and trying to achieve one very specific aspect of intelligence. The final approach to AGI is a universalist approach. And this is looking at how we can build AGI with unlimited computing power and then scale down to implementation. So the primary model in this field is the AXE architecture. So AXE is a type of reinforcement learning model, which means it learns through performing actions and receiving positive and negative feedback from its environment. So the AXE model works by before taking any action, it actually references all of its previous actions and the corresponding rewards. It then uses the Bayes theorem. The Bayes theorem is a way to systematically update probability in an ML model. Use the Bayes theorem to update with which of all of its past actions will be predicted to get the best reward for this current scenario. Then applies that specific action. And boom, continuously repetition. So these were the four main approaches to achieving AGI today. Now, I know that I have a long journey ahead of me because I'm just getting started, but I could not be more excited because someone needs to be driven enough to persist through the hundreds of hours of failure, motivated enough to devote their time and energy to advancing society forward, stoic enough to not care about other people's opinion and to conform to society, and lastly, ignorant enough to take on a long shot like this. And that person is me. Thank you. Oh, I think you're on mute, actually.
Thank you for that. So thank you so much for sharing your wonderful presentation. And we look forward to how AGI will be further built in the future and how it can change the future. So judges, do you have any questions for Aahaan?
Hello. I do have a question. Good presentation. Thank you very much. You mentioned 4 different approaches to AGI. Have you tested any of them, and what was the learning of that testing?
So I've actually only been looking into the field of AGI. I'm at a very early stage, so I haven't actually done any. But the way I would see as in looking at academia and research is the 2 most probabilistic fields would be the universalist approach, which is AI-XI model, and the connectionist approach. Because connection approach would be able to leverage all of the learnings and applications of current neural networks, but then tweak them and tweak mostly the gradient descent aspect. And that's been the model HCM that's been shown to one of the highest probability of success to achieving AGI. But personally, no, I have not had enough time to actually test it myself. Thank you.
That's quite fine. Have you had the chance to practice some additional machine learning or have some practice on those?
Yeah, so I actually got a full-time machine learning internship this summer, and I worked at the machine learning internship for the entire month of August, and I've as well continued it part-time throughout my school. So during this model, I built several machine learning models. I built several basic neural networks and I expanded them. And my overarching project is also working on an in-depth computer vision task to help with concussion prevention in the NFL. So I have quite a bit of experience in the machine learning space, just not AGI specifically.
Oh, go ahead, David. I'll go next.
Yeah, just a question more on policy implications, not just with technology and what it can do, but some of the challenges. So just wondering, have you thought about some of the barriers to proliferation of AI and some of the concerns that we see, especially in the US right now with discussions around Facebook, use of AI to target people for political purposes and, influencing votes. And, there's a whole host of things. And, so much potential for what we can do when we use data appropriately to solve big problems. But just because there's truth doesn't mean that people take action. And so just wondering what your thoughts are around some of the challenges that you see with AI, and then what are some of the things that we can do to help make people more comfortable with these types of technologies as it develops?
Right, for sure. So I think the barriers to, I think you mentioned 2 questions, so I'll address them both. The first question is in the barriers to AGI. There are a lot of logistical barriers and like the computational power, the resources, etc. But in terms of more looking at the safety, I think one of the big aspects is like everybody's had this looming threat of like, oh, AI superintelligence is going to destroy us. I think the best way we can actually approach that, especially as I'm learning into, is actually keeping in mind, being mindful, keeping the thoughtful approach as in how we're developing AGI. And a big part of it is actually transparency, because specifically machine learning models today, they're also known as black box ML. We don't understand what's going on. So creating transparency within the specific model and why it makes the decisions, as well as with the public about what's the research stage that, where are the barriers, what is some risks, what maybe it worked, it didn't work, is a great way to build public trust. And I know there's quite a bit of research going on specifically in like the effective altruism community around looking at how you can engineer AI safely with the proper architectures, proper barriers, etc. But I think a lot of things people say is that it's a lot of looming threats, but then it really comes down to when they see whether it's the benefits versus impact. And so a lot of people use AI, use Facebook, and they love it, and they love the tool. Oh, I love like Siri, Alexa, Google Maps, for instance. And so just really reiterating the fact that the pros will definitely outweigh the cons if there are any. And we need to make sure we keep in mind as we're early developing, especially in my stage, really early about, we need to be aware of what are the potential cons and how is the best way to implement them. So that's definitely a point of research I have as I go deeper. It's like, what are the current approaches being done to mitigate these big issues, and what are they succeeding or why not? Thank you for the question.
Sorry, I had another call.
Okay.
I had one last question for you, Aahaan. Assuming AGI will happen in some near future, in some shape or form, if you have to choose one problem to solve, what would that problem be?
Climate change. Exactly. And because I think climate change, it's fundamentally, there are a lot of system inefficiencies that can be like optimized, looking at factories, pollution, etc. And the real true power of AGI comes when it's able to do decision making. Whereas the climate change has a lot of different perspectives, stakeholders, each of these. That I think we need an objective approach, such as AGI, to help us to see, okay, this is going to be the best outcome for all XYZ people. I think that will be, it's also one of the most pressing problems right time. And there's definitely a lot of other world problems that I definitely don't want to discount. It just, especially with the latest IPCC report and etc., it's a looming threat. I think AGI is going to be specifically very applicable to solve that problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Earlier, you mentioned about your framework, and you said the first step is for you to learn first, and then you'll start applying later.
Mm-hmm.
Are you afraid that you may brainwash yourself into a box, and then you may lose some aspect of your creativity? The least you know about a problem, you're not in a box yet. So you're free to be imaginative. So I would suggest maybe to consider that, to not try to learn too fast of what other people are doing, and try to come up with your own model. Because you discuss those 4 models, but is there any other way that you think that, like, abstracting what other people have done, how would you solve it?
Right, exactly. I think that may have gotten lost, but the main intention for me to look into other models was to understand where the other barriers and then find my own approach. My end goal is not to go into any of these approaches. It's to actually see, can I use the learnings, the failures, the weaknesses, the benefits of the other approaches to create the infinite approach. And when I said the learning, I mean specifically is once I have the approach of how I think AGI will work, there's a lot of math fundamentals, the technicalities, the machine learning aspects I'll need to understand before I can actually work on applicable. So it would be still looking at my specific vision. And I definitely agree with your point that you don't want to constrain yourself, because AGI is a topic where there's infinite different pathways, and actually the pathway that will be work. That's why I love the topic of ignorance so much. It's like the fresh ideas bring fresh perspectives. So actually, by not knowing a lot about AGI and ML, just starting in the field a couple months ago, I actually have an advantage. So I definitely want to capitalize on that advantage by making my own approach. And then the understanding would be, how can I build that approach out? Which would be help with like the funding, this award, etc. But I need the understanding of building the approach. Thank you for the question.
And you also mentioned the black box and transparency that you think it's needed. But like, can you explain to a monkey how to build an iPhone?
Obviously
So-
not. You could. I think
Yeah.
the main you can explain a monkey how to build an iPhone. I think that's one of the things with like the public and ML is just looking at the analogies are the great way to do that. So if you were to explain a monkey, you'd use analogies, you simplify it. So I think the transparency comes as in the two aspects. The transparency of the black box would be for the actual researchers working on the model to understand specifically where it's failing, where it could be leading down a potential dangerous path or where not. And then transparency with the actual general public would not be about specific technicalities, but more about where we are at the stage. Because even if you look at AGI research right now, if you just Google it, you have to do quite a lot of research into academia to find out where we are, is it working, is it not working? So getting the general public to rally behind it would just be matters of doing public updates of whether it's working, whether it's not working, not necessarily the technicalities.
Okay. I think it's a bit of a danger of a black box. It's if the AI already explained how it takes its decision, it's in the weight of the network. Trying to explain it to us, we cannot comprehend. Our brain is not wired that way, but the information is already there.
For sure, that's definitely a valid point. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Any last word before we go next?
Thank you all so much for the opportunity. Thanks all the judges for coming and all your questions. And I can't wait to see the other presentations.
Thank you, judges, for the questions. Next up, we have Mikael Haji. Mikael is a brain-computer interface developer in pursuit of driving the next technological revolution by building the tools necessary to read and write our neural code. And let us welcome this intelligent 16-year-old to show us how his knowledge of neural code can solve our problems for tomorrow. Mikael, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mikael. I'm a 16-year-old brain-computer interface developer, and I am thrilled to be here. So let's get right into this. Okay, so it was humanity's greatest jigsaw puzzle. Built up over evolutionary eons, it featured 46 spiraling ladder-like structures, 3 billion pieces, and took thousands of scientists working around the globe 13 years to complete. The Human Genome Project was an inward voyage of discovery, led by an international team of researchers looking to determine the sequence of all the 3 billion little puzzle pieces in our DNA. And it was all done on a machine that looks like this. It costed about $1 for each base, was super inefficient, and was overall just a very slow way of sequencing the genome. Fast forward 3 decades later, with the arrival of next generation sequencing technologies, we have drastically changed the way we sequence the genome by rapidly improving the status quo. So to give you an idea of what the difference in tools looks like, the Human Genome Project, 3 gigabases, 15 years, $4 billion. One run on a machine with next generation sequencing, on the other hand, 600 gigabases in 7 hours for $300. The Human Genome Project was a unique opportunity to empower millions of institutions to solve some of the world's biggest problems. It was a legacy project that will continue to light the way for several generations to come. As a neuroscience enthusiast, learning about how we put the puzzle pieces of our human genome together, it makes me wonder when we will start making strides in building the next jigsaw puzzle of our time, the jigsaw puzzle of our brain. I believe that we are about to enter into one of the most consequential revolutions in the history of the human race. Namely, because by putting the puzzle pieces together, we will understand the building blocks that make up our neural code. And so if you think about it, if we don't unravel this master code that allows us to interpret any neural activity at will, at stake will virtually be every radical advancement that we are able to imagine. For example, what if you could walk a mile in someone else's shoes? What if you understood my contextual framework? What if you understood my memories and my emotions? Would that change the way we deal with each other, the way we cooperate, the way we make decisions? Would that change our creative ability? What if instead of our enemies, we destroy the concept of enemies? And what if we increased the limitations of our biological brain and increase its bandwidth? I mean, these are really cool implications. The question is, why does the ability to read our neural code hold any importance in society? I want you to take a look at this graph. As you can see, as technology continues to grow at an exponential rate, our intelligence has remained stagnant. It is flatlined. We have gone from clubbing each other with stones to shooting each other with automatic weapons. And although technology hasn't surpassed the sum of human intelligence, if we don't act fast enough, it will pass us. So at what point in time do we look at the difference between the capability set of our technology and our own abilities and say we feel very uncomfortable? When I look at the world and try to assess who's investing in the brain, who's trying to improve its abilities, who's putting the capital, I am astonished. Why is the brain such a blind spot on our society? Yet everything we are, everything we build, and everything we aspire to become stems from the brain. I am in pursuit of devoting my life to the brain, specifically in regards to building the necessary tools to read and write our neural code. So what is the state of play? What can we do today? Well, we have the most common brain-computer interface modality, EEG. We have fMRIs, FNIRs, magnetoencephalography, etc., etc. But the problem with these neuroimaging modalities is that it paints only broad strokes of brain activity, like a series of satellite images over a hurricane that shows the storm moving, but not the formation and disruption of individual clouds. In general, these technologies lack the foundational power we need to read and write our neural code. And so ultimately, we are at the primitive stages of the Human Genome Project. This BCI in my hand is the equivalent to that of the sequencer in the 1990s. And so this is why I am committed to building the killer app of brain-computer interfaces by iterating on and improving functional ultrasound imaging modalities full stack, from the atom to the ML. The end goal being to take control over cognitive evolution by building the tools necessary to read and write our neural code. So, why take a chance on me? 2 years ago, a boy lost his grandmother after her 8-year journey with Alzheimer's. Growing up, it was devastating to watch someone he loved lose their humanhood right before his eyes. As an 8-year-old kid, he was always so curious as to what was happening. One day, she would remember his name, and the next, she wouldn't. It was as if a light in her brain had been shut off. She went from being someone who he knew to someone he didn't even recognize. What had gone wrong? This was the question he asked himself every single day. And so he fed his insatiable curiosity of the brain in order to understand the puzzle that was his grandmother's memory. And that little boy was none other than me. From reading the most complex neuroscience books I could get my hands on, to researching about various topics related to the brain, from free will to consciousness, from that point on, I was in constant pursuit of understanding and improving these complex systems. 2 years after my grandmother got the disease, I was empowered to convert my learnings and experiences over the years into action. And at the age of 10, I attempted to find a solution to Alzheimer's using CRISPR-Cas9. This project was recognized by the top engineering designer firm in the world, Worley Parsons, and I was granted the Engineers of Tomorrow Award. In my early teens, I continued to develop my breadth of knowledge about the brain. However, it wasn't until 1.5 years ago that I realized that in order for me to understand, interface with, and improve the brain, there must be a technological revolution. And that is what has brought me to stand in front of all of you today. My obsession and my passion for brain-computer interface. In the past year, within BCIs, I've created a proprietary 3-in-1 technology that can effectively diagnose, stimulate, and treat all brain disorders associated with the limbic system. I've created multiple white and academic papers related to BCIs. I've spoke at Canada's largest developer summit by IBM on brain-computer interface. I've built and coded 15+ brain-computer interface projects ranging from rating interest in visual content using EEG to lie detection and more. I've built 3 projects in the head office of one of the top BCI companies, Neurable, using their new EEG headset, the N10. And I've also built an emotion classification messaging app for one of the top brain-computer interface companies, Emotive, in order to give voice to the voiceless. These are just a few critical milestones within my world of BCIs. And each one of these puzzle pieces portray the wide array of experiences of my life so far. And I'm thrilled to be sharing my journey with you. This is only the start. So join me as I take control of our cognitive evolution by building the tools necessary to read and write our neural code. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikael, for your informative presentation, and we've learned a lot about brain-computer technology, and I look forward to how it can impact our tomorrow. So, judges, what do you think about Mikael's ideas, and what would you like to ask him?
As for me, I'm primarily curious about the right functionality of the ultrasound imaging. What kind of an area of the brain does it blast when you're trying to send an input?
Yeah, that's a great question. If it's okay with you, I actually have an appendix. I'd love to show you one of the slides. Basically, if we're able to pull that back up, awesome. So a recent study held in March questioned whether functional ultrasound imaging was with what can be used with non-human primates to reliably detect movement intention. And so for the study, the non-human primates learned to focus on a central dot on the computer screen and then grab and manipulate a joystick to move a cursor to that target. And ultrasound data captured the brain activity, fed it into a sophisticated machine learning algorithm, as you can see here, and then basically once trained, using data from just a single trial, the algorithm was able to correctly predict the subject's use of the joystick with a whopping 90% accuracy. And the kicker of the whole study was that what we found out is that with current focused ultrasound, it's possible to measure brain activity at a resolution of 100 microns, which is basically roughly 10 neurons in the brain. So that's insane, because that basically means that we're well on our way to, because functional ultrasound being in such a primitive stage of overall like the neuroimaging progression, we know that now with better state-of-the-art technology, we can get that number even lower. So yeah.
What about the write though? Like that's for reading. What about writing input into the brain?
Oh, okay, yes. So in terms of writing the neural code, I actually have something to show. Actually, no. Okay, so basically, for writing neural code, there's with ultrasound, you're able to with certain waves, you're able to actually like using a Doppler ultrasound, you're able to pass certain waves, ultrasound waves, into the brain in order to actually stimulate certain parts of the overall functional ultrasound. It's a relatively new technology, and so ultimately what I'm focused on primarily is reading our neural code. And then as soon as we're able to understand how we can read the neural code, then comes various different neuromodulation techniques in order to actually be able to write our neural code.
Okay. And out of curiosity, assuming that writing cover a large area of like 1,000 cells,
right,
what could be the negative impact of that, in your opinion?
Right. So ultimately, writing. So you're just to reiterate your question. Basically, you said if we wrote the neural code of 1,000 neurons, what are some of the negative implications of what that could cause? And
yeah,
so,
like if you stimulate a large portion of the brain.
Right. Okay. So if we look at current neuromodulation techniques and current like neurostimulation techniques, we have things like transcranial direct current stimulation or transcranial alternating current stimulation. And the problem with all of these different neuromodulation techniques is that it actually, number one, it could cause cell death. Number two, there's a lot of problems in regards to certain frequencies of ultrasound. We're not exactly sure whether, if we go back to the ultrasound example, we're not sure whether ultrasound is safe enough. And like I said, since functional ultrasound is in its primitive stages, that's somewhat the beauty of it. We're able to continuously iterate on the technology. Right now it's in clinical trials, and ultimately it could become the gold standard of neuroimaging modalities.
Okay.
One question for you, Mikael. Thinking about connecting machines, receptors, sensors, in some shape or form, the traditional way is basically to put electrodes or some sensor on the skin or on the head, or could be tomorrow non-connected and so forth. One question is that in your research and your thinking, how much have you considered the human rights of giving access to this information to a machine? And how do you think people want that information to be given to others or not? So it's not about the technology anymore, it's about how do you think the behavior of human will be in the future, and how people want to do that at all or not?
Right. That is a great question. And I think ultimately, if we look at history, right, with the addition of computers and specifically social media, if I go on Facebook right now, I ultimately have, like, Facebook knows more about me than I may even know more about myself. And so ultimately, what I'm trying to get at is that right now, with the primitive stages of neuroimaging modalities, right now what we need to do is work hand in hand with various different encryption technologies in order to effectively ensure that people's data privacy is our number one concern in terms of functional and in terms of building the next killer app of brain-computer interface. And so really, I definitely believe there will be a mass adoption of brain-computer interface, and when we are able to effectively develop a certain neuroimaging modality with that allows it to become a need as opposed to a want. And so with phones, for example, it has become with iPhones, for example, it's become a need as opposed to a want because of the certain implication and examples that it's sort of creating for us.
Thank you. Yeah, privacy is an important topic, but imagine that the technology will allow us to cure someone who has some form of diseases. So this is basically a way to get into people's lives. It's not just about my privacy, what I'm doing and what I'm looking at, is about what I'm thinking about.
Right.
And at some point, the most hidden part of our intimate personality will basically disappear.
Right.
And that's something that is worth thinking. Is about as technology evolves, if we know what people think and how they are, of course, it's going to be easier to communicate, but maybe a part of us disappears as well. So I don't know if you have an answer to that. You don't have to have an answer, but I'm just giving you a feedback. That's,
yeah, absolutely.
There's a limit. There's a limit in that consideration. It's like, do you want to build more atomic bombs, or do you want to basically improve CRISPR up to a certain level? Mm-hmm. Are we ready socially as a society, right, to start that process?
Yeah. Ultimately, it's like,
let me add on to that, because it's very along the lines of that theme, right? So if you know more about how the brain is reacting, say more real time, right, and you can predict problems, mental health, right, especially around younger kids, mental health issues, depression, anxiety, suicidal tendencies. And so if you know these things, what do you do with it, right? I mean, I think it would be very invasive to go, I know that you're going to have a problem, and so I need to treat you now, or I need to write something to your brain so you don't hurt yourself or do something. So how do you reconcile those types of issues? There are definitely benefits to knowing, but right, what do you do with that knowledge? I think is maybe a follow-up.
Yeah, so ultimately what we need to think about is like what the applications that will be unlocked with this technology. And so when it comes to mental health, there's already technologies like with, for example, this EEG device, there are various commercialized products already, like the Muse and technologies like Dream and things like that, in which are already like looking at mental health and creating this personalized assistant in order to effectively create this personal assistant to people with mental health issues. I think that what ultimately this will be like, what for your specific use case, there will be a set, like it really just comes down to how exactly we develop and how invasive we are, like theoretically. So like for an example would be for mental health. Instead of us being in charge of like sort of like personalized medicine, it would be more so like, hey, you seem very stressed right now. Why don't you take a break? And so ultimately, that's two very different examples. And so really, it's just our approach that's really important.
Yeah. This is a field that is growing, and I think you're in the right path of thinking along the same line. If you have seen companies like Affectiva, that you probably have heard of, researched,
right?
Understanding behavior based on facial recognition is already putting some limits about, basically, we know that this person doesn't understand what I'm talking about. This person is hiding something. And without being connected to the brain, just on facial expression, it creates already a unknown territory for psychologists, ethicists, and others to even allow deployment of technology.
Right.
So it would be useful maybe to take into consideration, right, the scope of these technologies and pursue your journey in directions that society will accept.
Exactly.
And morality will accept. Maybe in 100 years, things will be different. But in the next 20 to 30 or 40 years, there are going to be some debates.
I definitely agree. It's just about how we approach this, because whether we like it or not, neuroimaging is going to be a daily driver in our day-to-day lives. And so how can we optimize in order to create the best version of humanity possible? And that comes down to our approach at the end of the day. So number one, get the technology to a level in which we could read and write our neural code. And then number two would be also like developing certain pathways in order to effectively make sure that we're using this technology right.
So thank you, judges, for the questions. Next up, we have Brianna Gopaul. So Brianna has previously built a Farnsworth Fuser, and her focus lies in nuclear energy. Outside of climate change, she's also interested in building solutions that can solve an infinite number of problems using machine intelligence. So let's give this time to Brianna to shed light on more methods to resolve complex problems. So Brianna, please.
Hello. Thank you so much for creating this award, by the way. Like, regardless of who wins, I'm sure that person will go on to do really amazing things, and I wish the best to them. So at 14, it was really the first time that I realized that I had this voracious curiosity for learning anything and everything about the world. And I used that curiosity to really understand the field of quantum computing at the time. And so I would run home from school and just open up quantum mechanics textbooks and really try to understand like the most difficult aspects of why doesn't a quantum computer work today. So this is actually one of the photos that I took with a few friends, and we went to this company called Rigetti in San Francisco, and they're working on superconducting qubits and building like these really amazing quantum computers. And we actually did a hackathon there where we were building quantum algorithms to solve some problems within drug discovery. But throughout this process of just trying to learn this field using the internet, I got to meet some really smart people who became my mentors throughout life. One of them was Christian Wiedbrook, and he's the CEO of this company called Xanadu that works on photonic quantum computing in Toronto. And so after building a relationship with him and showing him that I had this ability to learn and that I was willing to like take feedback and listen, and I had the patience to understand difficult things, he offered me an internship at his company called Xanadu. And so I actually got to build this documentation that teaches scientists how to write their own quantum circuits. And I also got to do some research in this new field called quantum machine learning, which is the intersection between quantum computing and AI. So I was thinking about, okay, can we use reinforcement learning and combine it with a quantum circuit and create anything useful? Is there any form of advantage to building these quantum neural networks that mimic reinforcement learning? At the time, the conclusion was no. But overall, like during this period, it got me thinking about whether I actually wanted to work in quantum computing and whether it was the right area for me. And that's really because quantum computers are fundamentally limited by the type of problem that they can solve. They can only solve a certain type of problem. And this was a problem to me in that I wanted the work that I create for humanity to be able to solve potentially an infinite number of problems. I don't want my impact to be limited by the technology that I try to develop. And while I was having a lot of these thoughts, I met this guy named Jordy Rose at Creative Destruction Lab, which is a startup incubator in Toronto. And Jordy and I, we're very much on the same wavelength in that, so he started this company called D-Wave, which is the world's first quantum computing company. And he then went on to start Sanctuary AI. And so a lot of the things that I was talking to him about were like, okay, if quantum computing cannot be used to solve an infinite number of problems, then what can solve an infinite number of problems? And while we were having these discussions, we were thinking about like artificial general intelligence and creating a general problem solver. And some more questions that we had to think about is like, what actually is intelligence? What makes something intelligence? How can we define intelligence? And given this definition, can we go on to build intelligent machines that either mimic the human brain or are some like deep learning, reinforcement learning abstraction of what we think intelligent is? And so I ended up working at Jordy's company called Sanctuary AI, where we were trying to build human intelligent robots. And so these are robots that will one day be able to literally like replace the human workforce. And the idea is that you build a robot that has a physical embodiment. And so it can take in a bunch of sensory information and process it kind of like a human. And how Sanctuary AI approached it is that they had something called a cognitive mind architecture. And this cognitive mind architecture was an abstraction of how they think the brain generally works using reinforcement learning and deep learning. So I was working on a specific problem for them and doing some research in, well, let's say we have a robot and it's taking in a massive amount of data. How does that robot actually process which parts of that data are important? And so essentially it's doing some decision making. And I was basically combining a bunch of like deep learning and natural language processing algorithms to come up with a solution that worked for this specific task. And so Sanctuary AI was kind of my first opportunity where I got real hands-on work in basically this new field called like general intelligence, or there's a bunch of companies that are working on trying to create general problem solvers. And it's the first time working on something like this. And while working at Sanctuary, I was kind of trying to develop this model for what I think would work when we're trying to pursue this goal of building intelligent machines. And I think there's two general methods that I believe may work in the future. The first one is kind of what Sanctuary was doing, which is building intelligent machines using AI. So we're creating representations of how we think the brain kind of works and what we think could be intelligent using just like reinforcement learning and deep learning models. And our hope is that these models can eventually have this ability to learn anything and everything, and then be able to learn how to learn and iterate on this process of learning, which allows them to then eventually become super intelligent. That's the kind of general goal. The other approach to AGI that I found really fascinating recently is the idea of simulating a human brain. I mean, the brain is like the perfect example of what we have kind of readily available that we can kind of tinker with and play with and try to understand. And we know for a fact that it is intelligent. And so this idea of using human level intelligence as a benchmark to then pursue a greater form of intelligence, whether that be super intelligence or anything of that form, I think that makes a lot of sense, because the problem with like AGI in general is that we haven't actually defined what intelligence is. We don't have defined goals for things. Things are very kind of up in the air. And so if we're working towards this goal, we should have defined goals. And one of them, in my opinion, should be that we should create things that have some form of human level intelligence. And so I've been doing some research in how we can actually go about simulating the human brain. And it was a couple of days ago that I had this idea of like, okay, we have an understanding of physics from an atomic level. Is it possible to literally rebuild the brain atom by atom in a simulation software? And so a year ago, I actually spent some time tinkering with this idea, and I simulated a neuron in MATLAB. And what I learned from this process is that, well, a lot of the simulation software that exists isn't very good at simulating neurons. And when I say isn't good, I mean these simulations are overly simplified. And so they don't account for a lot of the data, for example, like at a molecular level, what's happening at a neuron. Like it's all abstractions for how the simulation kind of shows what a neuron is doing. And that's one of the problems with this idea of simulating a human brain. It's that neurons are incredibly complex. And if one neuron is really difficult to simulate, and we have to deal with all the data that is kind of involved in this one neuron, imagine simulating 86 billion neurons. So this task is really difficult, not to mention that it literally relies on us having enough computational power and ability to just store this data in a way that makes sense to us. And so this is kind of what I learned from tinkering with this idea of simulating the human brain. But a lot of these ideas that I have, I'm actually going over with a neuroscientist. Her name is Amna Haider, and she has a PhD in neuroscience at UBC. And so it's actually in the past like couple of weeks that I've been like texting her on and off about ideas that I have, and we'll just talk about them. And I think this is like the most fun part about coming up with ideas, is that like I am naive and I don't know, like I don't have the understanding that a PhD has. And so I could come up with a bunch of random ideas that may be completely naive, but in the least, like I'm working with an expert who can then kind of ground my ideas in reality. And I can still kind of give her a counter argument of like, oh, but what if we did this? And that's been like a really fun process to go through because I'll just be like walking to class and I'll just like have a random idea that I'll write down. And it's also because in the past year, I've also been working more so in like nuclear energy. During my last year of high school, I built something called the Farnsworth Fuser, which is this small fusion reactor. And the reason for doing that is because I've always had this desire to build physical things and to build things that can potentially contribute to like a world problem. And so in this case, I was reading a lot about climate change statistics, and I was like, climate change is a big problem, and it will definitely cause an immense amount of human suffering in the next couple of decades. How can I try to contribute to this issue while also just building skills that I think are useful? And after building this fuser, which I'm 2 months away from doing real fusion, I stopped the project midway because I got a job offer at this company called General Fusion. And so I moved to Vancouver and I started doing like in-person hands-on experiments for them, where I was testing the interactions between materials for their fusion reactor that they're actually building. But the interesting part is that now that I've had this like understanding in another field, I can then use these ideas from all these areas that I've looked at and try to kind of build an idea or a model that I think might work. And that's been the fun part. For example, like last night I had a couple of ideas about, oh, what if we were to literally create like an ion beam or some type of particle beam and like shoot particles at the brain? Like, would that allow us to understand more about the brain than we don't already? And so in this case, like I'm kind of intersecting this knowledge of nuclear physics with like neuroscience and my idea for simulating the human brain. Or even the fact that I had this idea of how can I build a brain atom by atom that came from this understanding of like physics and nuclear physics, and like the fact that I've been learning about all these things and building these things. Now, right now, as it is, I'm studying engineering physics at the University of British Columbia. But my general plan for the next 3 years is just to explore these two approaches to AGI and understand the challenges faced in both. And so far, I've more so understand the challenges faced in creating intelligent machines at Sanctuary Ai, but I more so want to explore this idea of simulating the brain and using physics to further understand the brain, with the end goal of maybe we can create intelligent machines that are more based off the brain than what currently exist. Another goal that I have throughout the next 3 years is just to tinker with these random ideas that I have. I have an idea book and just like a bunch of scraps of paper that I have like around my room of like things that I've thought about. And the great part about being in a university right now is that I get to just like walk up to a PhD's door and like get his advice on what he thinks about my idea. So that's like just a goal that I have. It's not only about like ideating and knowing whether this idea is something. A lot of it also comes down to just physically building a prototype of what you're thinking about and tinkering with it physically. And I think through building that fusion reactor, I've gained the skills to actually just build whatever the heck I want physically, which is a lot of fun. And the last thing is that I would like to contribute to climate change in some way. Although, again, like these are general goals that I haven't fully defined. And so whatever idea that I have, whether it be in machine intelligence or climate change or both, because I do think that these areas are the most important things humanity must do in this century. I do want to play a leading role in like both of these areas. Thank you.
So thank you, Brianna, for sharing with us more about quantum computing and also inspiring us to be more actively involved in climate change. So the judges have any questions that you'd like to clarify with Brianna?
Hello, Brianna.
Hello.
Thank you for the presentation. You like to learn, right?
Yeah.
That sounds an obvious question. Out of all the learning that you had between nuclear physics and robotics and AGI, among many others that you mentioned, if you had to choose one of them today that you think, obviously you need to learn more, right? And deepen and practice. That goes without saying. But if you had to choose one of them to experiment with and really to go on an island without anybody attached to you, right? You have no reference point anymore. And it's on your own experimenting without any Wikipedia, anyone to talk to. Which one would you choose?
I'm thinking I would go about like the simulation of brain and like creating something with human intelligence throughout, just because like if you look at a field like nuclear energy or quantum computing, like there are textbooks of like ideas that people have already developed. Like the field is already very developed. Whereas like in the realm of like AGI and human intelligence, like it's so nascent that the ideas aren't even fully defined. And so just because of the fact that this field kind of barely exists, you can do a lot of interesting work building from the ground up. And the interesting part about like human intelligence is that a lot of it comes down to like philosophy and just being able to think about what is intelligence, what makes us intelligent, things like that. And so a lot of this work can actually be done just like through conversation with yourself and through tinkering and like kind of playing devil's advocate with your own ideas. Now, that's probably the field that I would pick just because the least amount of progress has been made in it. And therefore, I think I could do the most in that field, not given all this prerequisite knowledge. Another point that I think about is that for like quantum computing and nuclear fusion, you almost need to have this like massive foundational knowledge in physics and math. Whereas when it comes to something like human intelligence, you can have a bunch of ideas, and a lot of these ideas, like you don't need to understand the entirety of like physics to like come up with an idea that may actually work. And that's another like part that matters a lot.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to pursue my question by asking you to be remembering that you're on an island and you have access to no one, no internet, no PhD student, no teacher to talk to, no textbook. And you have to come up with something of your own. Are you still going to be choosing AGI? And if you had to run some experiments, imagine the condition for you to be free from the island is to run an experiment on your own. What would you do? Because you have accumulated a lot of data points and interesting facts and understanding from a variety of sectors, and you've talked to many people. Now, if you had to use that knowledge to do something, what would you do?
So I'm on this island and I have all the knowledge that I currently have accumulated in life.
Yeah, you just have to run an experiment to be freed from the island. Yeah.
That's fun. No, I think I'd still pick human intelligence and AGI. Yeah, because like when you think about the other fields, a lot of it is also just like you must validate what you're doing experimentally. Like you must you must have all this like expensive equipment and run the experiment to know that what you're doing makes sense. Whereas when it comes to like something like AGI, I don't think you necessarily need that at first. Like you can even go back to like Turing days and kind of like replicate his experiment. And that's an experiment that like kind of tells you a bit about like what is intelligence and like is this thing that Turing created actually intelligent? Like that's an experiment that I could create on that island. Yeah. And so I think I'd be able to create experiments that are like that, but it's like, I wouldn't need all this equipment and like expertise to do that. It would just be like from the ground up, me thinking by myself for like several nights on end. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, let's make a hypothetical scenario.
Mhm.
You have two algorithms that do AI, but it's trained on two different tasks. One task is very simple data, like let's say very basic arithmetic,
Mhm.
and the other task is some really advanced stuff that is really complicated, and most human
Mhm.
being cannot solve that problem. And so the algorithm A perform really badly on the simple task, but do really well on the really complex one that human beings cannot solve.
Mhm.
And the algorithm B, it's the opposite. Which one
Mhm.
is most valuable, do you think?
Mhm.
And I'm
Yeah.
not saying in terms of financial aspect, more in terms of conceptually.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking like, oh, if it's like a simple task that involves arithmetic, then like the person who can fulfill that task is just a human. Like I don't think you need AI to necessarily do that. Whereas like if you have a complicated task that humans can't do, then it would probably be more valuable to humanity to have an algorithm that can do that task, right? And then also it's like, oh, if this like neural network per se like has learned something really complex, then the interesting part is like, okay, how did it learn that thing? And what's like actually happening at a granular level with like weights and biases and whatnot. And like, can we then take that algorithm and then like kind of use it for other things as well? Can it learn more complicated things? And once we've kind of like defined the level of complexity that it can kind of learn at, can we expand that further? Yeah, that's my thought on that.
Okay, here's a theory for you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's assuming that it's someone already solved the GI, they just didn't know because the algorithm was trained on a data set, and other like the more statistical type of algorithm were
Mm-hmm.
just performing better just
Yeah.
because they were trained for like thousands and thousands of iteration,
Mm-hmm.
and the other algorithm could eventually have learned to get there, but it needed to start with really basic information, just like a baby.
Yeah, I see.
So is it possible that we shot ourselves in the foot because we just tried to shove a really complex problem in the first place, and we didn't realize that we are biased in the way we are trying to evaluate algorithm in the first place, possibly?
Yeah, this is a general problem that I think I talked to you about before of like, oh, like our ability to create something with general intelligence is also limited like fundamentally by what we deem intelligent and like what our brain like just how our brain evaluates things in general. Um, it like sometimes I think, oh, is it even possible to create something with general intelligence in that like you have to trust that our form of reality that we're understanding is true reality. Yeah. Sorry, what was your question exactly?
Well, at this point, is I would be
Possible.
wondering if you manage to build an AGI or like an
Mhm.
algorithm and you're trying to make it work, what
Mhm.
would you test it on?
Oh, I see. Yeah.
A complex problem or a simple problem?
I'm thinking at first you would test it on a simple problem. Um, like let's say you made a bunch of algorithms that you think like may be able to have like general intelligence. You'd probably have to create like a list of problem sets, and these problems would be separated by category, and that like all of them would be solved in different ways, right? And initially, those problems would have to be simple because you need to be able to solve a simple problem to solve a complex problem. Um, and so, when I'm thinking about if you were to create an algorithm that can do this, like what you probably have to do is like not trust like your instincts towards what you think will work, and more so just test things. And that like you again, you'd have this repository of problems that you'd have the algorithm solve, and it'd have to go through them, and you'd probably start with this most simple problem. Yeah.
Because that's the thing, that's the difference between intelligence and logic versus
Mm-hmm.
memorization.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think most AI algorithm right now, it's memorization.
Yep. I agree. Yeah. Um, yeah, like this is actually something that like I talked to the team at Sanctuary about, in that like they were creating a criteria for how they're going to objectively measure progress, and that's like one of the reasons why they think they're in a very good position. This is 2 years ago, so they may have changed, but they kind of created a basis of like how they think like one of the problems with like AGI research in general is that like we don't have metrics, and we haven't defined things very well. And so how do you know that you're actually making progress towards creating something that has general intelligence? And so their idea is like, this is the idea of like a lot of people, is that you create like this, again, like a massive repository of a bunch of tasks that something can do, and you kind of score it on its ability to learn and its intelligence. So assuming we define intelligence as the capacity to learn, then we can score it based off that criteria on whether like it did well on like this long list of tasks, and these tasks should be very much varied, right? Yeah.
Okay.
You're the consummate Renaissance woman, and I've been to UBC. It's a great school, and I really applaud President Ono and all that he's doing, especially around climate. The things that you talked about, the humanities, philosophy, psychology, engineering, physics. I'm sure you've experienced some frustration in those, what I call cylinders of excellence, right? Because there's not a lot of collaboration, especially in higher ed, cross-pollination of ideas.
Yeah.
And so, the things that you talk about, like if I'm on an island, I can still have this philosophical kind of introspective process of trying to figure out what is intelligence, and then how do I then implement that into a solution and engineer something and develop something, shooting ions into the brain. How do you navigate that? And especially being in an institution of higher education, how do you bridge that? How do you think we should bridge that gap so that we can solve maybe these big problems, whether it's AGI or human intelligence or anything that is like climate change or other things?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've thought about this for myself in the sense of like, during the next, like my degree is 5 years long. Assuming that I stay for that 5 years, it is very possible that like this kind of like fire that I have in me to like solve these problems and think about interesting new ideas, it's possible that that's just kind of beaten out of me through school. And so I've kind of like, I've thought about this for like the world and for myself. And for me, it's more so like this constant reminder that like, one, I have the ability to like do as impactful things as every other human that has existed in my lifetime, and just that genuine belief. Because a lot of people that I meet, like my peers in school, they don't believe that they can do like interesting big things, and it's kind of this like irrational, arrogant confidence that you have to believe that you can do these things. The second part of that is just like not being closed-minded to other ideas and accepting the fact that like people from different fields will think about things in very different ways, and you should, in the least, be open to their ideas and the way that they think about things. And so one thing that I've been doing is just like making friends in different majors, especially those people who are in higher years, because they've kind of developed how they think about things and they've developed a knowledge base. And like really understanding like why they think the way they do, and how I can use that form of thinking to solve a problem. So one thing that I used to do with a couple of friends who were like very interested in like biology and longevity is that we'd have conversations and they'd be facing a technical problem, and I would try to like solve the technical problem without knowing anything about biology or longevity. And I think having conversations like that are very important, because even though your ideas may be like completely foolish, just coming into it without knowing anything, or rather coming into it having like another basis or another knowledge base, is like super important. To answer your question about like generally like what can like institutions do about this, I think a lot of it comes down to like incentives, and the fact that like in research the incentive is to publish papers and get into a journal, or in school a lot of the students' incentive is just to get good grades or just get a career and make money. And so if you like literally remove that incentive structure, which is kind of what this award is doing, it is, and you kind of filter people more, in that like you're filtering for people who don't care about pursuing that incentive. You filter for people who genuinely want to like create valuable work and genuinely are interested in what they're doing. Then you will have a large group of people who like will be willing to collaborate and work on these things. And so one idea that I have in this like idea book is like, one day when I have more money, I would like to kind of create like my own little research institution for like certain ideas that I think are very important. And that is to just relieve researchers and like creators and builders of this incentive structure that they must adhere to. And instead, like your objective in this institution is just to generate ideas that are like useful, and also build and test those ideas to make sure that you're creating like something that is actually valuable. I think that's the best way, to be honest. So it's like this openness, and also just removing like the incentives that currently exist, and really only like caring about like curiosity and this like willingness to create like valuable information for humanity and to solve these problems.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you, Brianna, for sharing from your heart, and I really appreciate your time. So now we will have to give this time to our next contestant, which is Anath. Anath is a 15-year-old software developer. He became the youngest intern in the world at IBM. After a year of self-taught coding, he realized that AGI is humanity's most important pursuit of the 21st century. And he started going really deep, with mentorship from top researchers, with the likes of OpenAI, DeepMind, IBM Research, and more. So without further ado, let us invite the person himself, Arnav, to share more about his thoughts on how to solve the world's problem today.
All right, can you guys hear me? Awesome. All right. Okay, can you see my screen? Everything working? All right, cool. All right, so today I'm going to talk to you guys about AGI. Let me just start my presentation. So science has undoubtedly been the engine of human progress for the past 100 years. And when you look at any metric, whether it's disease burden, GDP growth, infrastructure, all of these things have radically improved because of the strides in development we've been able to do. But in the past 2 decades specifically, our sort of exponential growth, historically speaking, has become more so logarithmic. And we're not really seeing as many advancements or promises being fulfilled like we saw in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And there's many theories as to why this is the case. Some point to bureaucracy in institutions such as the government and university. Others point to geopolitical conflict preventing cooperation. But the most common answer, and the simplest, is that we are limited. The rate of progression of these problems, such as quantum computing, synthetic biology, nuclear fusion, all of these problems are just growing at an exponential rate in comparison to our brains and our intelligence. And this is a real problem because as looming threats such as climate change approach us, we have a countdown until we have to solve some of these problems. Otherwise, obviously, the end of the human race as we know it. So what will be this thing that will allow us to fundamentally change the way we go about solving problems and overcome our hurdles in innovation? Hey there, my name's Arnav. I was already given a really good introduction, so thanks for that. But my story is when I was 10 years old, I was diagnosed with a rare form of blood cancer called chronic myelogenous leukemia. And obviously, the first year was really, really difficult for me, my family, my friends, my parents. But after I was told that I would survive and that I would have, a good life with few adverse health effects, I unlocked a massive epiphany. See, I had previously gone to India and Thailand, and I had seen extreme poverty firsthand. I had seen the children that didn't have access to healthcare, that didn't have access to housing, that were not in financially stable households, some were even amputated and were impossible to get work. And what it made me realize was, I have cancer and my situation was tough, but I only survived because of the place I was born. If I was born, as a girl in India with the same condition, I probably would have died because of the lack of resources that I considered to be non-trivial at the time. And that was super, super empowering because it made me realize that making a huge impact on the world and solving the world's biggest problems wasn't only just something I wanted to do or something that would be good for society, but a moral obligation for all the things that had been given to me. So today I'm going to talk to you guys about some of my research in artificial general intelligence. Aahaan already gave a pretty good overview of how AGI works, but kind of just to resume some of the things he was saying, the issue with AGI today or with AI today that you're familiar with is that it isn't even real AI. Today, it's what's called narrow AI, and it's basically just more efficient signal processing. But even if you take the world's most efficient algorithms, such as DeepMind's AlphaGo, which is a really, really powerful reinforcement learning agent that's capable of playing chess and Go at like an elite level, being the world's best players. If you asked to do something such as, counting the number of airplanes in the sky or differentiating a tree from a cat, it would completely fail. Because today, if you change a single parameter, hyperparameter, objective data set, the entire network collapses. And this is obviously a huge issue. So how or what is the reason that this takes place, that we can't have generally capable agents today? It's because of something called catastrophic forgetting. The way that neural networks learn is through an algorithm called gradient optimization, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Basically, it's just taking the partial derivative of the loss function, which is responsible for dictating how inaccurate a network is, with respect to the parameters, which are adjusted to interpret the network. The issue, though, is when a new data set is fed into a network, you won't be able to have that previously learned information, since after a couple of gradient updates, a couple of epochs, all that information will be forgotten. And so all of the previous work that you did will cease to exist. I know what you're thinking. Why not just store that information, right? Like, why not just keep it in memory and then retrieve it and use contextual understanding afterwards? The issue with this is that when you're running multivariable calculus on 100,000 dimensions, 1 million dimensions, and many medium to large class applications, you'll see 1 billion dimensions. That just isn't possible to run. There isn't enough computational power in our observable universe to run that. And so we need something fundamentally new. A really interesting milestone that was unlocked in 2017, I've cited the paper at the end of my presentation here, was the introduction of a penalty term. And the way that this works is you add a constraint to the gradient update so that the weights and biases, the parameters that are being updated, have very little wiggle room, which means after you've learned an initial task, there's very little updates that can be made afterwards as you scale up, as to keep the initial information that was taught. There's two problems with this. The first is that, one, as you scale up, it becomes absolutely useless. The accuracy of the network on a large scale is basically removed. And the second thing is, since these terms that are considered to be important are added to a penalty during the training stage, if you are dealing with any application in the real world that has random data or anything you haven't dealt with before, which is obviously a massive value proposition of AI in general, it's completely useless and can't do anything about it. So this really isn't applicable for what we're actually trying to do with AGI and solve some of the more interesting pursuits. So today I'm going to talk to you guys about a novel implementation I've been working on called gradient projection memory. And you'll see at the end of the presentation, it actually has some amazing results. So the way that a normal gradient optimization algorithm works is kind of like this drawing that I've done right here, where you take the point and the data and you optimize it to a certain point so that the accuracy is the highest. The issue with this, though, is as you scale up in tasks and add more and more objectives, more and more input data, this initially optimized point is going to be far from the optimized point for the other tasks, which makes it basically useless for all these other tasks. So what I'm proposing instead is we go in the orthogonal direction of the best optimized path. In this sense, we go to a point that is very well optimized. It doesn't necessarily have the best optimization, but it's very well optimized, that has a low error. And the kicker is that it's the best optimized or very well optimized for all of the different tasks. And so in this fashion, we can get it to work very, very well with many data sets. Diving in more specifically, how does this actually work? What we do is we compute the gradient space, so the vector space of the gradient, and we partition it into two separate parts. The core gradient space that will be responsible for the part of significant representation of our neural network, and the residual gradient space, which is in charge of the smaller input to weight correlation. First, we begin by creating a representation matrix R, which just contains a bunch of stochastically chosen inputs. We know due to work that was done in 2017 as well, that the inputs that are, this is actually a highly accurate representation of the model despite being stochastically chosen, due to the fact that the inputs must span our gradient space. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to run singular value decomposition on our representation matrix, factoring our big rectangular matrix into smaller matrices. And we're going to take one of these matrices, U, which has the parts of significant representation. That's just the nature of singular value decomposition. And we create a subspace S, which is going to span the first K vectors. These are all bases of this sort of linear independent vectors within this matrix U. And as you might be able to guess, that's how we get our core gradient space. It's just the subspace of all of these, or the span of all of these bases. And so remember, what we're trying to do, though, is find the points with the least amount of input to weight correlation while still maintaining the most optimization. So that's where this entire aspect of orthogonality is added to the picture. We want to go in the opposite, or in the direction that's orthogonal, which is the residual gradient space. So now for tasks after that, we retrieve our gradient or core gradient space vectors and bases. That's going to be here M. And then when we project more bases from an additional task onto our gradient space, we subtract the part that is multiplied by these bases and the core gradient space. So that's, as you can see here, the second equation, the gradient of the loss with respect to the weights minus the loss with respect to the weights times the transposed CGS base. Then what we do is we just run, again, very simple singular value decomposition on our new bases vectors. And that will allow us to update our model, update the residual gradient space, which is going to have the orthogonal directions. Now, what's so good about this is as we continue over time, we will always find a universal base. We'll find like universal bases through all the tasks that we go on. And that will allow us to make our model as accurate as possible, even as the tasks ramp up. Obviously, it hits a certain point because at a certain point, there's just, when you find a new task that's not going to have any optimization paths that are in this residual gradient space, there's not going to be any vectors or any bases that will be allowed in this space. But it works really, really well comparatively to other metrics or other methods that you'll soon see. This is actually the results of carrying this method. When we look at orthogonal gradient descent, for example, with memory, we do completely better. We're like the purple thing here. We do fractionally better on time, which I'll get into in a second here. And for every single data set that was tested, including the combination of 5 data sets, obviously that's more so like AGI, we do dramatically better than anything that's ever been seen before. And so the reason why we're so efficient is because instead of calculating or computing the gradient directions like you would in a method such as ADAM right here, which is like, a standard gradient optimization method, what we do is we just compute the bases of the gradient space, which requires significantly less memory, which is, again, the name of the game in AGI. And so that is the reason why we have significantly lower memory usage on everything. And slightly, we can have a much higher learning rate just because of the nature of this. We can have a learning rate of 0.5 comparatively to something like 0.01 or 0.1 with standard gradient optimization algorithm. And so, yeah, what we've demonstrated here today is an algorithm that is capable of solving, multiple different problems at the same time, multiple different tasks at a rate significantly faster than the leading conventional algorithms today by our benchmarks. And based off these results, it is highly, highly possible. I'm not going to say probable yet because, everything is still a bit experimental, but it's highly possible that these algorithms, this gradient injection or gradient projection memory algorithm, could be the fundamental gradient optimization algorithm behind AGI when it's finally cracked. Thank you for listening.
Hey, thank you, Anna, for your incredible sharing on how AGI can benefit our future. So, judges, what are your thoughts on his presentation?
Earlier, you mentioned this was your work. Is it like an existing research paper that was published, or that's actually your mathematics that you're making some advances?
Yeah, I mean, the mathematics are obviously, they have to be created. But the thing that is taken from different papers, like I showed the references at the end there, obviously innovations in iterative game, a lot of these ideas, such as the idea of going like orthogonally is taken from other methods. But a lot of the formulas are new and, never seen before, novel implementation.
And then you tested your specific formula, and it performed better than the rest.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to include the code here because obviously it would take like 45 minutes to an hour to train. I don't think we have that time, but yeah.
And you created that in the last 2 weeks, or?
Yeah, well, I was working on it a little bit before, like a day before we started our interview process, but yeah. And obviously, it's not like a self-made by myself. There's a lot of people that were helping me from IBM research and stuff like that, trying to get good feedback points from other experts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a quick question on, what do you think would be a real meaningful application of the work that you're doing?
So basically, the field that I'm concerned with, transfer learning, is how we can move where we're currently at, like with neural networks that are narrow, to what is possible with AGI. And so basically anything here, once it's done successfully and out of experiment trials and in the real world, has any application with AGI. And so due to universal approximator theorem, we know for a fact that AGI can solve basically any problem. And so anything from novel engineering methods for climate change, we've seen AGI or AI in general is very good with like generative design when it comes to like engineering principles. So that's really interesting with applications in carbon capture, to just about literally anything you can think of. AGI does have that massive implication almost everywhere. So it is kind of like a universal problem solver.
Thanks.
So how many iteration does it take your algorithm to get into an optimum? Yeah, you mentioned that it was normally like the learning rate was a lot smaller, like 0.0001, and
Yeah.
yours is 0.5. So
Yeah.
you need a lot less iteration to get to an optimum.
So in the trials that I was doing, for the different data sets, I spent about like 10,000 epochs on each algorithm for each data set for the transfer learning method, just because obviously the nature of it is as you go to more data sets, so by the time you're on like the 4th or 5th data set, you're going to need to have like a significantly higher amount of epochs running, just because you need to have like those smaller fine tunings. But yeah, it was about 10,000 per data set per algorithm.
Have you ever considered an algorithm that would make a ballpark prediction first and then start the gradient descent from there, as opposed to starting somewhere that there's no chance it is anyway? Because a human being that think we make prediction all the time, we don't do gradient descent whatsoever.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely like an interesting implementation. My idea here was kind of just to like iterate on some of the papers that I saw before that were doing some really interesting things and just make them better. But that's definitely like an interesting idea. I'll definitely look more into that.
Okay. All right. I don't have other questions.
One quick question, Arnav. Thank you very much. What would you like to do in 5 to 10 years from now? Assuming that you follow the general domain of AGI and machine learning and AI and other technologies, and maybe quantum computing and other stuff that you may like. How do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I think most of the interesting innovations, when we look at like history, have come from the intersection of different technologies. And I think AGI by itself is obviously really, really fascinating, but mixed with things like robotics, you can create like legions of robots that are capable of doing manual labor to a much higher extent than humans. With IoT, it's like a same principle. I was doing some work in IoT before. With quantum computers, as you were saying, they like tremendously assist. Quantum machine learning has proven to be extremely useful when it comes to training time. And so there's obviously applications everywhere. I think the main thing that I'm concerned with is just inventing AGI in the first place, because after that building block has been made and that research has been done, it opens the pathway for so much other research to happen everywhere, right? Because the entire value proposition of AI or of AGI is that it can do anything. It can solve any problem. And so by having AGI complete, and this is a very long venture, obviously, 10, 15, 20-year endeavor, maybe even longer, it makes it possible. It opens the gate for other researchers and other smart people to get things done with those intersections of technologies. And I think that's really where the impact's at. That's where the innovation happens.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, judges and Anath. So moving on, last but not least, we have Amy Lee. So this smart young lady has already had her hands on synthetic biology. So this 16-year-old has decoded the bioelectrical language and evolving xenobots to solve health and climate problems. So let's bring in Amy.
Yes. Hi, everyone. These past four presentations were like super inspiring, and I'm sure all of you would agree as well. I am Amy. I'm super excited to share my presentation today. I'm a 16-year-old researcher based in Toronto, and I believe that bioelectricity will do for bioengineering what software did for computers. But first, what did software do for computers? In 1940, this is what a computer looked like. It costed $4 million and weighed the same as 19 cars. And to do a simple computation like 2 + 2, you had to rewire the entire system. And of course, computer engineers also found out that this was not effective, not efficient, and so came the software revolution. Engineers found a way to abstract from the physical structure of the system and create a higher level language that treats power or electricity as information. And so if you wanted to do a computation like 2 + 2, instead of taking out your soldering iron and rearranging the entire system, you'd use these amazing things called keyboard and a mouse and give inputs into the machine so that it could do what you wanted it to do. And these inputs would be transient. You wouldn't have to like press down the button for like the entire computation and result in permanent outputs. And all in all, engineers discovered that with advanced enough hardware, with an advanced enough machine, you could reprogram it to do radically different functions and maintain the same hardware. And this enabled a global connected community with billions of users connected to the internet and with education being democratized all over the world, and also enabling the creation of products that bring value just with software, such as the products on the screen here. And this is why A16Z's initial investment thesis was that software is eating the world. However, now they have a new thesis, which is that biology is eating the world. And this is because we have advanced enough that biology is no longer simply an empirical science to discover more about the world we're living in. It is an engineering discipline, meaning that we can use it to solve complex problems. And one of such problems is shown in this research project here. So with these frog embryos, they had a genetic mutation that prevented them from being able to develop their brains properly. And so what researchers did is they modified the bioelectric dynamics, or the distribution of ions in the frog's brain. And just like that, it was able to restore completely normal brain development. And keep in mind, like, there was no genetic changes. It was simply just a changing of the electrical dynamics. And the crazy thing is that, like, it wasn't limited only to the brain. By inducing the same bioelectric pattern on like the tail of this frog, they were able to enable non-neural cells to also produce neural tissue, become neural cells. And these powers that bioelectricity holds, I believe, can really advance humanity's understanding of our own brain and what we can do with it. However, not many scientists are using the bioelectric approach. A lot of bioelectric research, biologic research and bioengineering is stuck in the genomic dimension, the hardware realm, where scientists are looking to DNA and proteins to make edits. And this has some downsides, including the inverse problem that DNA has no direct relationship with 3D anatomy and CRISPR off-target effects, many side effects, which makes bioengineering quite unreliable. And also, since every organism is quite different, many treatments have to be personalized, making it cost and time intensive and also very unscalable. And this is why I believe that bioelectricity has the potential to transform the way that bioengineering is done today. Just some examples of what bioelectricity is capable are shown on the screen here. Scientists have been able to grow an eye in the gut of a frog. And this eye started growing neural tissue back to the brain, meaning that it can now see out of its gut. And this was not able to be done with any genomic approaches, even with like the master gene regulator like PAX9. Here, this is a xenobot, which is when researchers took frog embryo cells and turned it into like a programmable soft robot. Researchers were able to just like put this transient cuff on this frog's leg for 24 hours. And then instead of like growing out to be a stump like how it normally would, it grew into like a perfectly functional like webbed leg. And on the top right, you can see this is by a company called NovoCure, who used this process, this bioelectric process, to remove cancer from the brain and other areas of the body. And this approach is now FDA approved and also has like absolutely no side effects. And this is all possible because bioelectricity is the software of the cell. Like mentioned before, when computer engineers are trying to create a software program, they call functions. And when calling these functions, they don't need to be concerned about everything on the back end, like the machine code of ones and zeros. They just need to know like, what the function will do, and the computer will take care of the rest. The same goes with biology and organisms. By just calling a bioelectric function, such as like build an eye, and inducing like the bioelectric pattern, the organism will be able to build an eye. And we don't need to be concerned with like what micromanaging the DNA, what changes that we have to make, because the organism already has pre-built signaling pathways that it can follow, and we just need to communicate the right bioelectric signal to it. So why should you trust me to be at the frontier of this bioelectric revolution? Well, in the past, just 1 year ago, I became super fascinated with how we can actually edit life. And I started experimenting with like CRISPR-Cas at home, and also designing plasmids to help medusoids break down pesticides in the oceans. However, through these projects, I discovered a problem, which is that like it was really difficult to know which specific gene changes to make to result in like a large-scale 3D result. You could only do it through like trial and error, or looking to what other previous researchers have found through trial and error. And that is when I found this TED Talk by Dr. Michael Levin that talked about bioelectricity. And I became super into the field. I started evolving xenobots with my mentor at University of Vermont, who's also on like the xenobot pioneering team. And the xenobot is clearing plaque from arteries. I also read a bunch of bioelectric papers that Michael Levin wrote, and wrote a conceptual biology review to summarize everything learned. I also reached out to him and asked him some questions that I did not know the answers to make a more accurate review. And as a side project, some friends and I decided to compete in iGEM, which is an international synthetic biology competition, and dive into a field like that was completely different from what we normally dove into, which is the future of food. And right now we're working with a Dr. Rhett Varney to edit Azotobacter vinolandi, which is a diazotrophic bacteria, to increase nitrogen fixation and bring us one step closer to ending world hunger. And my life goal is to use these incredible bioelectric tools that we have to solve the world's most pressing problems, and also exponentially enable others to also solve these problems. And lucky for us, there are many problems that we can solve. And I truly believe that with bioelectricity, it will be able to be like a better tool to help scientists understand and engineer processes of life. We can learn so much from processes of life. For example, like a plant can capture carbon so much more efficient than any carbon capture machine we've made. And like our brains run on like 20 watts of electricity, but can process like insane computations. And a computer runs on like millions of watts. And so you can imagine like if we can create some sort of program that like you can specify what 3D anatomical change you want to make, and then the program will spit out like what bioelectric changes you'd have to induce, and also the methods to do so. It would extremely expedite the process of bioengineering. And if that is not enough, I also strongly believe that bioelectricity will be able to augment the human condition, increase our creativity and computation, because we know that it is not resources or money that is scarce. It is good ideas and the people to implement them that actually is. I hope you now understand why I truly believe that bioelectricity will expedite bioengineering, just like how software accelerated the computer. And it is 2021, and it is time for the bioelectric revolution. Thank you.
So thank you, Amy, for sharing with us your insights on bioelectric dynamics. It was a very insightful presentation. So judges, do you have anything that you'd like to clarify with Amy?
But the big question for me is, how can you increase the brain computation of a human being? Will there be ethical problems just the same as CRISPR and gene editing, do you believe, or there's there, because you mentioned also the side effects are much less, so what's your thought on that?
Yeah, so bioelectricity has not been extensively documented, so I can't name like a specific change that will increase intelligence by like 10x. But what I do know is that bioelectricity is a way for us to communicate with our cells, and like no human knows how to be a cell better than our own cells. So it will be a lot more accurate, essentially. And although the side effects will be less, because if we induce a bioelectric change and something not ideal happens, then we can always just change it back by modifying the ion, the membrane potential, essentially. I think there's still a lot more to be done in like defining intelligence and experimentation with like humans or mammals at least. But that is my hypothesis for now.
Are you also learning about AI and like software and tools like that to apply to biology?
Yeah, I actually, in the Xenobot example I was talking about, I had to use an evolutionary algorithm. And that's essentially when you simulate evolution on your computer. Like you start with some like randomly generated Xenobots, and they make some changes, find out like which perform the best, which have the best fitness, and eliminate the not best fitness ones, and then continue mutating them until you reach like the final best design. And that required some knowledge of neural networks and AI.
Yeah, that's my thought. I think I saw some research about this, that they absolutely needed to use AI to modulate the bioelectricity field as it goes, because it's not fixed, so things change.
Very true.
So you're pushing that side of the AI as much as the biological side.
I think some researchers have made this program called like Betsy, and it's like this tissue simulator. So that has a lot of AI involved in it, and I'm currently in the process of trying to understand it and use it.
Lots of potential medical applications helping people that are injured, or well, maybe not even before they're injured or before they're born. I mean, some philosophical issues here, I think, that needs to be discussed. What are your thoughts around if you were to create this thing that could actually be used to modify, change, improve? What would be your vision for how this technology or this concept is used to better humanity?
I think one, it would just be like an incredible tool for researchers to use if they want to like modify organisms. But I think one of the first applications would be to solve all the health problems that humans have, or at least many health problems humans have. One example that I shared was like them using bioelectric fields to cure cancer with like no side effects. And I thought that was incredible because all the current cancer approaches have like many side effects. And so many like health issues, I think, can be solved by just like communicating to ourselves what to do instead of trying to micromanage their actions.
Sorry, Amy, I'm in between two different things. I'm in a board meeting on this one, but I listened to your presentation though. In addition to bioelectricity, what areas of biology are you interested in, and how do you see the intersection of biology and other sciences in general?
Other than biology, I think gene editing is like really important as well, because like a computer, you can like write in different software functions, but if the hardware is just not ideal, it won't be able to perform like any advanced computations or anything like that. And us as humans, we're limited by our hardware. We can't like grow wings because it's just not within what we're capable of. So definitely gene editing is something that I'm also really interested in. I think your second question was, how does it relate to other sciences? I think science is the study of like living things, right? Or, okay, actually that's biology, but there's like many different like physics formulas that definitely plays into bioelectricity. Like Patrick mentioned, everything is changing, so physics would have to be able to model that and simulate that. And with chemistry too, with bioelectricity, it's like changing ions or the movement of ions. So understanding like which ions they are and what like changes they can make is also very integral to the advancement of this field.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy and judges, for your time. And we'll now proceed to a time of intermission, and we'll be back from the break 20 minutes from now, which is at 12:18 p.m. in MDT. So have a good break, and we'll see you back at 12:18.
Cryptium. The crypto that mathematically ensures you never lose value while still offering high growth potential. Cryptium is mathematically built to ensure the value of your cryptium never decreases. Let's assume the price of cryptium falls 50%. Then cryptium will double the quantity of tokens in your wallet, effectively ensuring you did not suffer any losses. At last, no more panic selling. For the last thousands of years, such a feature was simply impossible. Only with the birth of Ethereum and what is called programmable money, could it be possible to enforce such financial mechanics, which is a true revolution. All these three innovations makes Cryptium a truly unique and innovative new utility that will be at the center of decentralized finance and ignite a new era of adoption for the crypto industry.
Hi everyone, welcome back from the break. So I hope you know more about Cryptium through the videos. So now we'll commence with the award ceremony.
So during the intermission, the judges have decided on a beneficiary of the US $1 million trust fund. This individual will ensure lifelong support on the development of their technology. So as shown in the video just now, this 1 million trust fund is powered by Audify's core blockchain technology, Cryptium.
So are you guys excited to know the prize winner for today? All right, so without further ado, let's announce the winner for today. Drum roll, please. So it is Anath! Yay! So congratulations, Anath. Yeah. We're so happy for you. So please come up to present your appreciation speech.
Well, I mean, honestly, I'm kind of speechless. You'll have to forgive me for my lack of speeching at the moment. But you know, obviously, a huge thank you to you, Patrick, for everything that you're doing. You're having such an immense impact on all of our lives, and especially with this opportunity, it really just shows like I can't even describe in words like how grateful I am for this opportunity. You're helping us all with like so much opportunity, expecting nothing in return, and it really does. Yeah, I can't really like it's unfathomable, really, and it's really refreshing to see that sort of good sense for the world today. And so I really appreciate it. Also, I think good shout outs are due for Naveed and Nadeem Nathu, who started TKS and allowed everyone here, all the contestants, to be at a position that they're at today, to even be capable of solving these sorts of problems and being here at the competition. So thank you guys. And yeah, I mean, it's a really surreal experience. I can't thank you enough, honestly. Yeah.
How does it feel that you'll never have to seek a job ever again?
I mean, it's like I can barely process it. Like you're told your entire life, like from conception, basically, this is the structure of how life goes, and now like it's like the matrix is like breaking. You know, it's like a completely different sort of reality now. And so, wow, like I can't even like describe it in words. Honestly, it's I'm just really grateful. I'm just tremendously grateful for everything you've done.
We need your brain, so we depends on you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, but it's my responsibility now to, you know, take the resources that you've given me and the extended privilege that you've awarded me to go now and solve, you know, the world's biggest problems and create GI.
Hi, Patrick. Would you like to also give your congratulations to the prize winner and any other finishing speech?
Yes, I'm really proud of all of you, the participant, that what you've accomplished. Arnav, you win the jackpot for today, and you'll make us proud, I'm pretty sure, in the next 40, 50 years, and even before, I'm sure. But we're feeling generous. I got approval from my investment fund to get a little bit more money out. So we wanted to also give an extra $500,000 to Brianna. And she's not on the stream anymore, but
Thank you. I really
so
appreciate
Brianna,
it.
the fund will be a slightly different for you. We're gonna try to support you to reach $1 million with a crowdfunding campaign,
Okay.
and we'll commit half of the fund.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Because you came in really close again. It was impossible to choose.
Arnav is very deserving of it, so I'm very happy that he got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
So, and then we'll also allocate 250K for the remaining 3 participants. Same concept with the crowdfunding, is that we'll match an extra 250K. So basically, nobody is losing today. Everybody is like having a lot more money to be able to live on and to focus on your research and your endeavor, because we really need you to solve the problem that we cannot solve. So you really deserve it.
All right, so that's all for today.
We hope you enjoyed today's presentation and are amazed by what the students have presented.
So congratulations to everyone, and also thank you for coming today for Patrick Poirier Solving the Impossible Award. This is Queenie.
Then this is Angeline.
And goodbye and have a great day.
I just want to.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so Patrick will have one last speech.
In order for the crowdfunding to be supported for the remaining participant, you may go to our website, cryptium.finance. It's basically https://cryptium.finance. And you can register on the newsletter, and then we'll be able to reach out to you once we activate the crowdfunding for the participants. And this way we'll be able to support them since they really deserve it. We need to be there for them, essentially. So we'll need your support as well. Thank you.